The night air in Scott County, Kentucky was bitterly cold on January 7, 2004. Frost clung to the branches of bare winter trees, and a heavy stillness hung over the dark stretch of road leading into Scott County Park. Inside the park's parking lot, the dim yellow glow from a single streetlight spilled across the hood of a silver car. The engine was still running. The driver's side window was rolled down, letting the frigid air seep inside. In the driver's seat sat 18-year-old Ashley Renee Lyons. Her head was tilted slightly to one side, an ultrasound image resting gently in her lap. The paper was crisp, the kind of printout every expecting mother treasures, a first glimpse at the tiny life growing inside her. But the ultrasound's joyful promise stood in sharp contrast to the scene around it. Ashley had been shot 3 times in the head and neck. The idling engine purred softly, but the life inside the car was already gone. For the people who loved her, the news would shatter everything. Ashley was 21 weeks pregnant with a son she'd already named Landon Abner Lyons. In a matter of moments, both mother and child had been stolen from the world, and the person responsible was not a stranger lurking in the dark, but someone far closer. What began that night as a grim discovery in a quiet Kentucky park would unravel into a tangled story of young love turned toxic, jealousy and betrayal, a case where the killer was tied to Ashley in the most intimate way possible. If you want more real crime stories like this one, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next case. Ashley's murder wasn't just about the end of an 18-year-old's life, it was about the collision of 2 futures. Hers filled with plans for motherhood and stability, and his twisted by selfishness and control. The investigation would expose not only a killer, but an accomplice willing to help silence her forever. It would stretch over years, winding through courtrooms and appeals, and leaving a family to navigate grief in the public eye. But before we get to the crime scene, before detectives connected the dots, you have to understand who Ashley Lyons was and how her life led her to that fateful meeting in the park. Because the answer to why she was there that night holds the key to everything. By the time Ashley left her house that evening, her friends and family had no idea she was heading straight into a trap, one that had been set for weeks. Ashley Renee Lyons was born and raised in Scott County, Kentucky, in the quiet community of Stamping Ground. She grew up surrounded by the rolling hills and farmland that make up so much of central Kentucky for her parents, Bufordess. The Buddy Lyons and Carol Lyons, she was more than just a daughter, she was the heart of their home. Her older brother, Chris Lyons, would later describe her as funny, loyal, and full of life. If she loved you, she'd go to the ends of the earth for you. From a young age, Ashley had a warmth that drew people in. She was the type to drop what she was doing to help a friend, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and showed up when it mattered. In school, she was well liked, not because she tried to be, but because kindness seemed to come naturally to her. By 2003, Ashley had graduated from Scott County High School. She didn't waste time figuring out her next step. She found a steady job at Advance Auto Parts, which fit her personality perfectly. It was hands-on, practical, and gave her the independence she craved. Ashley wasn't the type to sit still. She liked working, earning her own money, and having her own plans. But like many young adults, Ashley's personal life was more complicated than it looked from the outside. At some point after high school, she began a relationship with a man named Roger Lee McBeath Jr. Roger was older, charismatic in a rough around-the-edges way, and their connection quickly turned intense. But it wasn't long before those close to Ashley noticed the relationship had a darker side. Roger could be controlling and volatile. Friends would later say there were fights, breakups, and reconciliations. Despite the tension, Ashley seemed drawn back to him time and again. Eventually, though, they split for good, or so it seemed. When Ashley discovered she was pregnant, the father was Roger, and even though their romantic relationship was over, Ashley seemed determined to do right by her baby. She named him Landon Abner Lyons and started planning for a future as a single mom. By early January 2004, Ashley was 21 weeks pregnant. Her latest ultrasound had given her the first real glimpse of her son's tiny face and form. It was a moment of joy, one she wanted to share even with Roger. On the evening of January 7, she told her family she was heading out to meet him at Scott County Park to show him the ultrasound photo. It was supposed to be a brief meeting. Her parents thought little of it. Ashley wasn't naive. She could handle herself. Besides, the park was only a short drive away, and it wasn't unusual for her to meet friends or run errands in the evening. But there was a detail no one could have predicted. Roger wasn't coming alone. At just 18 years old, Ashley was standing on the edge of a new chapter: motherhood, independence, and the hope of raising her son in the same close-knit community she'd grown up in. She was still figuring life out, but she had something to live for now, something bigger than herself. Her family would later recall that in the weeks leading up to her death, Ashley had seemed hopeful. She was looking forward to baby Landon's arrival, saving money and preparing for her new life. But what they didn't know was that the very person she was trying to keep in her son's life was the same one who would decide neither of them should have a future. When Ashley drove into Scott County Park that night, the trap was already set, and the person who helped set it wasn't just Roger, but another woman with her own reason to want Ashley gone. The evening of January 7th, 2004 was cold and damp in Scott County, Kentucky. Streetlights cast long shadows across the parking lot of Scott County Park, the kind of place that felt lonely after dark. It wasn't a night anyone would linger outside if they didn't have to. Ashley pulled her car into the lot a little after 7 p.m. The engine stayed running, heat blowing gently inside, the radio a soft background hum. She had an ultrasound photo folded neatly, ready to show to Roger Lee McBeath Jr., the father of her unborn son. If Ashley was nervous, there was no sign of it. This meeting, as far as she knew, was about her baby, but Roger didn't come alone. He arrived with Dana M. Williams, his current girlfriend. To Ashley, this may have been awkward. After all, Dina was not only Roger's partner, but someone who had every reason to resent her. What Ashley couldn't know was that both of them had already decided she would never leave the park alive. Investigators believe Ashley rolled down the driver's side window to speak with Roger. It's unclear whether they exchanged heated words or if the conversation was calm at first. What is clear is that within moments, Roger pulled out a gun. 3 shots rang out, echoing across the empty lot. The bullets struck Ashley in the head and neck, killing her almost instantly. Her hands never left her lap, still clutching the ultrasound image of baby Landon. The murder weapon was never recovered, but later testimony would suggest that Thomas Williams, Dina's brother, had provided it to Roger. What happened in those few seconds was as cold as it was calculated. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was an execution. Dina's role wasn't passive. She helped lure Ashley to the park, and after the shooting, she assisted Roger in trying to cover their track. Prosecutors would later argue that her jealousy and loyalty to Roger fueled her willingness to be part of the plan. After Ashley's body slumped in the seat, the car's engine still running, Roger and Dana left her there. They didn't call for help. They didn't check if she was breathing. They simply vanished into the night, leaving the heat from the engine to keep her body warm long enough to confuse the early stages of the investigation. It wasn't until later that evening that a passerby spotted the silver car sitting in the park, engine humming in the silence. Approaching the vehicle, they noticed the driver's side window rolled down despite the freezing air. Inside, Ashley was motionless, her head tilted slightly, the ultrasound photo in plain view. When police arrived, the scene was haunting. The car doors were locked except for the driver's, which had been left open just enough to lean in. The lights from the squad cars bathed the frost-covered pavement in red and blue. Officers quickly confirmed there was no sign of life. The time of death was estimated to be shortly before she was found. Ashley's baby, 21 weeks along, was not yet viable outside the womb. The killing had ended 2 lives that night. For first responders, it was impossible to ignore the bitter irony. The ultrasound photo, so carefully preserved, had been left untouched on her life. In that moment, the investigation's tone shifted from simply finding a murderer to finding someone capable of killing both a young woman and her unborn child in cold blood. Within hours, detectives would have their first clue, a name that kept coming up again and again. And it belonged to the last person anyone wanted to believe could have pulled the trigger. Family members told them she had gone to meet Roger Lee McBeath Jr., the father of her unborn child. That was the first red flag, especially after they learned that Roger was now dating Dina M. Williams. Multiple people mentioned that Ashley's relationship with Roger had been rocky. Arguments, bad breakups, and tension over the pregnancy were common. Some even hinted that Roger didn't want the baby and had been pressuring Ashley about it. The investigators quickly realized that Roger wasn't just a possible witness, he was a prime suspect. When police first approached Roger, he claimed he hadn't seen Ashley that night. He said he was with Dina. The alibi seemed rehearsed, and when Dina was questioned separately, her story matched a little too perfectly. Detectives have a saying, "Perfect alibis are suspicious." Real life rarely lines up that neatly. Over the next several hours, officers noticed cracks in their accounts. Timelines shifted. Small details were forgotten, then remembered differently. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to keep digging. Ballistics experts confirmed that Ashley had been shot 3 times at close range. Given the position of her body, they believed the shooter had been standing outside the driver's window. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting she never had time to react. The murder weapon was missing, a deliberate move by the killer to erase a critical piece of evidence. But witnesses eventually told police about Thomas Williams, Dina's brother, who had allegedly given Roger a gun days before the murder. That tip gave the case new direction. Detectives decided to lean on the weakest link. Dina, they believed, was more likely to crack than Roger. Under pressure, she admitted she'd been with Roger that night, but denied pulling the trigger. She insisted she only went along because Roger wanted to talk to Ashley. But in the eyes of the law, helping lure someone to a location where they're murdered is more than just a going along. It's complicity. Once Dina started talking, the puzzle came together. She admitted that after the shooting, she and Roger left the scene, and Roger disposed of the gun somewhere she claimed not to know. Her confession wasn't complete, but it was enough to confirm that the couple had acted together. In April 2004, 3 months after Ashley's murder, Roger Lee McBeath Jr. was charged with murder and tampering with physical evidence. Dina M. Williams would later face her own charges, ultimately pleading guilty to complicity to murder and tampering. For Ashley's family, the arrests brought some relief, but the long legal battle was just beginning. The prosecution would have to prove not just that Roger and Dina were involved, but that Ashley's murder was premeditated. In court, the defense would claim there was more to the story, that the shooting wasn't planned, and that Roger never intended for Ashley to die. But when the evidence was laid out for the jury, the truth would speak for itself. By the spring of 2004, Scott County prosecutors had what they needed to take Roger Lee McBeath Jr. and Dina M. Williams to court. The case was built on a mix of forensic evidence, witness statements, and Dina's partial admissions. It wasn't going to be easy. Without the murder weapon, the prosecution would have to rely heavily on circumstantial evidence and testimony. In 2005, Dina made the first major move. Faced with the possibility of a life sentence, she agreed to plead guilty to complicity to murder and tampering with physical evidence. In exchange, prosecutors took the death penalty off the table and recommended a lengthy prison term. Her plea confirmed the prosecution's theory. Roger had pulled the trigger, but she had played a direct role in luring Ashley to the park. She would later serve time at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women before being paroled in 2021. Roger's case went to trial in 2007. Prosecutors painted him as a man unwilling to take responsibility for his unborn child. Willing instead to eliminate both the mother and the baby to solve his problem, they brought in witnesses who testified about his threats toward Ashley in the weeks before her death. The jury didn't take long. Roger was convicted of murder and tampering with physical evidence. The sentence, life in prison. For Ashley's family, it felt like justice had finally arrived. But in 2007, not long after the conviction, the Kentucky Supreme Court overturned it. They ruled that procedural errors during the trial, including issues with jury instructions, were significant enough to warrant a retrial. For the Lyons family, it was a gut punch. They would have to endure the entire process all over again. In 2009, facing the possibility of another drawn-out trial and another appeal, Roger changed his strategy. He pleaded guilty to complicity to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. It was a legal shift. By pleading to complicity, Roger avoided the label of a principal killer in court records, even though the facts still pointed to him as the shooter. His sentence, 42 years in prison. It wasn't the life sentence the family had hoped for, but it guaranteed he wouldn't see the outside of prison for decades. Roger has remained behind bars ever since. In January 2024, the Kentucky Parole Board reviewed his case for the first time. After deliberating, they denied his parole, issuing a 10-year deferment, meaning his next chance won't come until 2034. By then, he will have served 30 years for his role in Ashley's death. For Buddy and Carol Lyons and for Chris, it's a bittersweet outcome. They know he will likely live to walk free someday. Ashley and Landon never got that chance. In the years since the convictions, Ashley's story has lived on, not just through court records, but through the voices of her family who refuse to let her memory fade. But the scars left behind are deep, and the question remains, did the system truly deliver justice? Every court date, every news headline, every parole hearing reopens the wound. Chris Lyons, Ashley's older brother, has been one of the most vocal advocates for keeping her memory alive. He's spoken publicly about the night they lost her, about the ache of knowing his nephew never took a breath, and about the frustration of a justice system that, in his eyes, never went far enough. For Ashley's parents, Buddy and Carol, life split into two timelines, before Ashley's death and after. The other four was full of everyday moments, dinners together, laughter, the excitement of preparing for a new baby in the family. The after is defined by absence. Holidays are quieter now. Birthdays come with a pang of what should have been. Every January brings the anniversary, a painful reminder that no matter how many years pass, the loss is permanent. In 2021, Dina Williams was granted parole after serving roughly 16 years behind bars. Her release stirred deep anger among Ashley's loved ones. To them, she was just as responsible as Roger. Without her help, they believe Ashley might still be alive. The thought of her walking free, building a new life, feels like an insult to the life she helped take. Then, in January 2024, the Kentucky Parole Board met to consider Roger Lee McBeath Jr.'s first request for release. The hearing was tense. The Lyons family submitted victim impact statements, urging the board to keep him in prison. They didn't want to risk seeing Ashley's killer on the streets while they still lived with the consequences of his actions. The board denied his parole and issued a 10-year deferment, making him ineligible again until 2034. For the family, it was a temporary comfort, but only temporary. Ashley's case is still remembered in Scott County, not just for its cruelty, but for the youth of the victim and the double loss of both her and her unborn son. Friends and family have kept her memory alive through stories, photos, and memorial events. When they speak of her, it's not about the crime. It's about her laugh, her loyalty, her excitement about becoming a mother. Even with the convictions, there's a lingering question that haunts those who knew her. Did the justice system truly balance the scales? Dina is free. Roger will one day be free, but Ashley and Landon never had that choice. For viewers, her story is a chilling reminder of how quickly trust can be betrayed and how the most dangerous threats sometimes come from those closest to us. What do you think? Did the system deliver justice for Ashley and Landon? Or was this a case where the punishment never truly fit the crime? Let me know in the comments.